Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Writer's Room. This is like my fourth attempt to do this piece because for some reason yesterday I couldn't get the audio and the visual to sync up, so I'm going to try this again. Today we're going to talk about the rules of writing. A lot of people too, there aren't really any rules, and that's kind of true, but guidelines of writing doesn't sound quite as good. So rules of writing, one of those I think you probably should never break, was told to me by Alan Steele, and that is thou shalt not be boring. I think that's probably a good one to start with, because clearly when you write, you want to have the person immerse themselves in your story. If you're boring, they're not going to, they're going to put it down. So that's probably a good rule not to break. Another set of rules, these are from Rob Chilson, author of Shores of Kansas. He's got some rules of the first page, especially short story pages. And that is 1, grab the reader by the nose. 2, shoot the sheriff on the first page. And 3, give the reader somewhere to stand. So in a short story, you don't have a lot of time to get things going. So on the first page, you really want to do something punchy that gets the reader involved, grabs them by the nose. You want to get your plot going quickly because you've only got a few thousand words. So start that plot, shoot the sheriff, whatever it takes. And you want to give that reader somewhere to stand, which means they need to know, are they in ancient Rome? Are they in outer space? Is the main character male, female, alien, super intelligent, dust mop, whatever it is? They need to know where they are, who they are, what's going on, and it needs to be interesting. This isn't really that easy. Damon Knight, who was a science fiction author and editor, if you haven't heard of him, he used to do something, I was told, called the red pencil test, and people would give him their stories, and he would read it to the point where if he was the editor you had sent your story to, he would have stopped reading. So he'd take out his red pencil, he'd draw it across the story, and he'd hand it back to you. And he's like, here's where you would have gotten your rejection slip. And apparently people would be angry sometimes, and they would say, but you didn't read the whole story, it gets better, it's really has great finish or whatever. And he's like, yeah, but I don't have enough time in my lifetime to read every word people send me in the mail to edit. I can only read until, this is where it bored me, I couldn't get into it or whatever, and it's your job as the writer to keep me involved and to keep me interested. If I'm not interested, I'm not going to buy it. So certainly if I'm the reader, I'm not going to finish reading it. So trying to get across to people that you can't just wait, start the story off slow or put a lot of backstory right up front. If you lose people, then you lose people and they don't finish the piece or they don't buy your book, right? So make sure you're interesting, punchy, get that story going. In a novel, maybe you don't have to do it exactly on the first page, but try those first couple of pages. Because again, if someone's like in an actual brick and mortar bookstore and they pick up your book and they open up the first page and it's boring, they put it down and then they look at another book. So you really want to grab those people by the nose, as Rob says. So those are like actual rules I think you probably don't want to break, and basically it's be interesting and get things going. So basic stuff. So there are also rules that are kind of more guidelines. For instance, one of those things that people get told a lot when they're beginning is never write a flashback. And but stories can work with flashbacks. That's okay. It's just that flashbacks are often kind of difficult to pull off because they kind of stop the forward momentum of your story a lot. They force your reader to, okay, this is where I left my characters. Now we're looking at the past. Now we're going to come back forward. It's easy to lose people if you're not doing it very well. And if you're a raw beginner, you probably need to know some other things first. A flashback could be great, but you really need to know how to write dialogue, how to write description, how to get your story arc going, and get that punchy first page. Those are much more important skills than how to do flashbacks. But it doesn't mean you can't do it or can't learn it. Maybe it's more of a secondary consideration if you really are having trouble writing clunky dialogue and people are just like, nobody talks like that, dude. Your characters just aren't believable. Those are the things maybe you really ought to focus on instead of flashbacks in the beginning. But if you want to try it, you can try it. If eventually you think you've got other things down and you want to write some flashbacks, do it. So just make sure you know, it's one of those skills that you may need and want in your little skill file. But may not be the first one you want to work on. Another thing is some people are really enamored of the word or of words that go with dialogue that aren't said or asked. Use said or asked 99% of the time because your reader doesn't really have to read them. The eye kind of skims over them, keeps the flow of the words going. You know, I'm going to climb these stairs, said Joe, just comes out. But if every time your characters speak, it has to be described. I'm going to climb these stairs, shouted Joe. Oh, I really wish you wouldn't, replied Rebecca. I don't want to go up their stairs with those stairs, whispered Amelia, or whatever. And that makes your reader have to read those things when they could just skimmed over the word said. So use those kind of words sparingly, said, asked 99% of the time. And then when you really need it, you know, I'm going to climb those stairs, shouted Joe. And it's a little like seasoning, right? You use them sparingly when they're important. Another thing you want to try to keep in mind is point of view. Before the internet, before I was even in my writers group, I was in another group of people who would mail each other stories, you know, because we didn't have email in those days. And I had a story once I was supposed to be critiquing. It was only like 3 or 4 pages long, probably not more than 1,500 words or 2,000 words. And some of the sentences were in first person, some were in third person. They seemed to be happening in different places and times. I couldn't really figure it out. I literally tried to like categorize the sentences by who seemed to be the character, whose point of view it was. And I think that there were 6 characters, but I couldn't tell. It was just too confusing. So part of my critique was I don't even know what's going on in this story because each sentence seems to be from a different point of view. I think there are 6 points of view here. I'm not really sure. If you really, really, really have to have multiple points of view in this short story, maybe 2 is enough. Maybe 1 is in first person, 1 is in third person. I don't know. But in a short story, there's not a lot of room to do stuff like that. 6 points of view is really going to be tricky. And you're really going to have to make sure you differentiate between them so the reader always knows whose head they're in and who's telling them things, because they need to know, you know, what's going on. Your job really as a writer is to get those words down in an order that when someone else picks up those words and reads them, they know what you wanted to say. They know what's happening in the action. It's clear. They know which character's which. They know which character's telling them the story. All those kind of things, you want to make it so that you don't have to be there, right? You're writing these words down. A week later, a year later, 100 years later, someone picks up your words, reads them, and they know what you wanted to say. It's not enough that you know in your head what should happen. You need to figure out how to get it on a piece of paper, all right, or digital form, whatever, so that when someone else comes along, they know that this was what you intended. So communication is the thing, and anything that confuses your reader could make them stop reading, and then, you know, that's it for you. Another little thing is, you know, when you're writing, say, a novel, and you're going to be stringing a bunch of chapters together, you don't want to tie up everything at the end of a chapter, right? You don't want to just end the chapter, everything's fine, and then start a next problem once people turn the page. You want to see people, you know, write you or put reviews on Amazon or whatever to say, I couldn't put this book down. I thought I'd just read another chapter, but I couldn't. When I turned the page, I just couldn't help myself, because you want the end of the chapter to be like a little cliffhanger that brings people over into the next chapter and doesn't give them a place to stop. You don't want them to really catch their breath. But, you know, so if the character's crossing a stream and the stream is full of, I don't know, man-eating tigers or whatever, and they manage to do that, so they finally climb out the other side, and they've gotten past the tigers, so yay, that part is finished. But now they stand up and the next problem is there. Maybe the bridge over the next creek is on fire or something. But whatever it is, okay, bridge is on fire. End of chapter. and the person has to know what happens when they get to that next bridge. Or can they put the fire out, or can they just jump across the river, or whatever's going on. You want them to be involved and not able to put your work down. Another thing is you don't want to describe what's not there. I see this a lot from people, especially beginners. You do not want to have your character walk in a room and say, well, there were no chairs. It's kind of like that thing where you say, don't, if you tell people don't think about elephants, and they think about elephants. Well, don't say there were no chairs in the room, because some people are thinking about chairs and you just said there weren't any chairs. So, that doesn't work. You want to come into the room with the character, and the character says, the bare room was lit only by a single sunbeam coming in the cracked window, or something, so that people see a bare room, therefore they're not seeing chairs, and they know that there's a little bit of light and it's coming from a cracked window or whatever, but you don't want to tell them the things that your character doesn't see, because those things aren't there. So occasionally when I'm running along, I have the character walk into a room and I really want to type something like, there were no chairs. And it's like, okay, no, what is there? What am I going to describe that actually can be seen by the character? So sometimes when you're being lazy, it just seems like it'd be really great to just like skip that, but keep that in mind. Another thing is people will tell you, don't write, or only write what you know. If you stuck with that, you'd never be able to write a story in outer space, or about being, the first astronaut to go through a black hole, or a character from the point of view of, I don't know, cow. But whatever it is, if you just limit yourself to what your life is like, you're not going to be able to write a whole lot. There are plenty of things you can research. You have your imagination. There's no reason you can't write a story from the point of view of someone from a different time, a different planet, a different alien species. You just need to make it believable. Now, if it's a historical character, then you're kind of walking a line where you want your historical character to be historical enough to be believable, but also they have to be like modern enough that the modern reader feels for them. So if you actually were writing someone from a historical point of view and they were 100% accurate, I don't know that that person would be all that sympathetic a lot of the time. Maybe not, but you want to make sure that your modern reader identifies with that person, while at the same time they can't just be a 21st century person stuck in the 8th century, because that wouldn't be very authentic either. So you can see this sometimes in historical dramas or whatever, maybe on a television show, where someone is supposed to be from another century, and then they pop up with some line of dialogue that sounds very anachronistic. I believe if you've watched the Loon Lake takedown that Anne and I did for Spoilers with Friends, which is elsewhere on this channel, the witch character, who is supposed to be this sort of herbal kind of witch person in the 19th century in Minnesota, didn't talk very believably like she was in the 19th century in Minnesota. I think Anne said she sounded 21st century California or something like that. So you want your characters to be realistic enough that you can sell them as being from another time, but at the same time, they have to be sympathetic enough that your reader will root for them. Okay, so those are a few things you might want to keep in mind. Writing, obviously, keep in mind, is really, really hard. This is something that people seem to forget. I can't tell you how many times people come up to me and said, hey, one day I'm going to sit down and write a novel. I'm cheering for you. I hope you do it. But I'm not really convinced that if you don't spend the time learning how to write dialogue, learning how to mix the dialogue and the action and the description, and write believable characters and think about character arcs and story arcs and plots and subplots and whatever, that you're probably not the first time out of the gate going to write something that's very readable. And that's kind of, where anybody is in any skill. The first time you sit down to be a woodworker, or the first time you sit down to play the piano, or the first time you sit down to be an engineer or an architect or something, you're probably not just going to be able to pop out with a masterpiece. Maybe not even something relatively competent, and that's fine. That's okay. You need to learn that skill. Writing is a skill, and it can be acquired only with a lot of hard work. But if you want to do that and put the work in, I applaud you. And if you have any questions that I didn't cover here, write me a comment and I'll try to answer them. Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed this episode of Writer's Room. And I really hope that this time my audio and my visual sync up so I don't have to record it for a sixth time. And I will see you later. Please hit like and subscribe, and possibly that little bell notification so you know when I upload more videos. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Bye-bye.